E adesso
Now we're
parleremo
going
della
to talk about the ganache. Ganache is a preparation based on milk or milk and cream, or simply using cream based on the type of structure you want to obtain, so more or less velvety. Some chocolate, so dark chocolate must be around 67%. So it always depends on the density and structure of the ganache you want to obtain, the flavor you want to obtain. And a part of inverted sugar, so some honey. Often we tend to use an inverted sugar like glucose syrup because it tends to not bother the organoleptic features of the ganache. Honey has a lot of aroma, so it might not be optimal as a base for preparations. Ganache can be used as a filling, so we can simply insert it in a dessert. We can use it as a base to then make a chocolate pastry cream. This is important because often we think that it's enough to melt a chocolate and put it inside the pastry cream, but the sugars and the fats of the chocolate might give a structure that's too harsh to the pastry cream, so that's important to lighten the chocolate a little bit to avoid that the structure of our chocolate pastry cream, is too tough. So, filling base inside the dessert, we can use it as a decoration base in a dessert, so you can cool it down and put it in a pastry bag to decorate the external part of our dessert. We can use it as a base, glazing, icing base. Clearly a ganache will have an external structure that's much thicker compared to a frosting. Typical example of a dessert that's glazed with a ganache is the sacher cake. When you cut through the cake, the layering, the thickness of the ganache outside is quite thick. And then clearly we can use the ganache as an insert, maybe in a modern dessert, in a modern cake, or a mousse or semi-freddo. So it can be used in many specifications. Often we tend to confuse the ganache word. Usually we just talk about dark chocolate, cream or milk, and inverted sugar. Then clearly the evolution of our work brought to the usage of this terminology to indicate some structures that are very similar. So we might have ganache, some raspberry ganache, some fruity raspberry starting from a base of fruit puree, if you want an inverted sugar, and a thickening base like white chocolate or something similar to white chocolate to so very often if you hear the word raspberry ganache, it is technically wrong to use this terminology, but it is actually common use because ganache has a very harmonic sound. So it is mostly used to bring this product to have a strong appeal for our final client. So this is kind of it about the introduction of the ganache explanation, and the demonstration part will be done by heating the milk or the cream based on the density we want. We only put cream now. And inside we're going to put our inverted sugar. Remember that in this case the cream does not, or the milk, they don't need to boil, but we can stop at a temperature of around 80-85 degrees. The chocolate must be finely minced. That's because when we will pour the cream and sugar, in this case syrup, on top of the chocolate must melt quickly and right away. We're going to do it in 2 or 3 steps not to lose the temperature of our cream. At the end of the preparation, we're going to continuously stir when we pour the cream on top of the chocolate, and with avoiding the formation of air. When the ganache is ready, we can amplify its structure by emulsifying it with a hand blender. In this way you can generate a structure that's more homogeneous. Clearly, if we're using the immersion blender, we will have a lot of air inside, so we can directly vacuum it to remove the excess air that we generated. So again, we're going to cool it down, so put the ganache directly in a vacuum bag, labeled, and preserve it in our fridge. The ganache can be regenerated either in the microwave by using professional microwaves that all of the suitable functions to heat up your ganache, or you can heat it up in a water bath. And this is it with the general introduction of the procedure of our ganache. We are again here for the demonstration part of our ganache. Before you start, always remember that we can aromatize our ganache as we wish, with classic aromas: vanilla, lemon, orange. We can use some spices, we can use some cinnamon, or also alcohol like Cointreau, Grand Marnier. So let's start. We're going to turn on the heat on low. If you want the cream to be a little bit lighter, you can just substitute a little part of it with some milk. So we're going to insert our inverted sugar. Always remember that every time products like a glucose syrup, or for example honey, are weighed on top of a container that can be glass, plastic, or steel, even though you scrape, a big part of the syrup will remain in the container you used when you weigh it out, and the same thing, it will remain attached to your spoon if you're using a spoon. So an advice is, before using it, I advise you to heat it up in the microwave so that it's going to be easier to remove it from the container. So we're going to heat up our cream, putting our chocolate here, and again our silicone cooking spatula to mix. Slightly stir the cream to allow the inverted sugar to melt completely. So we're going to improve the heating of the cream. Okay, so the surface of the milk is starting to move, so it means that the temperature is the temperature we need. So the heat is still on. So we're putting a small part of our cream and stirring it with the chocolate. So why are we doing this? Because when I will put the cream inside, as it works with the chocolate, it will tend to cool down. By keeping the cream on overheat, we're keeping the right temperature over time. So to make a good ganache, you need to work in around 2 to 3 steps. So when you have this quantity, you can turn off the heat, because we're basically there, so the majority of the chocolate has now melted. So stir right away so that you don't rip the chocolate. So again, always in the same direction. So, as you can see, our ganache is perfectly made. It's shiny, compact. It adheres to our spatula, and this means that if we had used a temperature that was too high, the fat part would have separated from the main chocolate structure, and it would have created a sort of slide that we would have seen on the spatula. But this consistency means that the temperature was perfect, so we didn't break the emulsion that we created. If we realize that the chocolate has kind of ripped, the fat part has ripped a little bit because we worked maybe on a water bath and we didn't have the control over the temperatures, what we can do is re-emulsify our ganache by putting it in with an immersion blender. So trying to recreate the emulsion. If you can't do it even in this way, always with the immersion blender, just add a small part of cold cream. By adding some water and fats again, you can reach the right structure of your emulsion. So I'm reminding you, from here we have inserted a nice amount of air. So from here what we're going to do is we're going to put it in a vacuum bag directly to remove the excess air, and then we're going to blast chill it positive, and then we can put it in a vacuum bag to then preserve it labeled directly in our fridge. Again, reminding you that the ganache is a very good structure to be added to some filling creams. It can be used on its own as a glazing for cakes, as an insert in desserts, as a base to decorate a cake both on the surface and in the external part. And remember that by balancing the quantity of cream and chocolate, you can obtain a ganache that's a little bit more liquid or maybe a little bit more rigid depending on your needs. This is it with the ganache explanation.